It's the week ending Friday the 24th of October, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the US imposing sanctions on Russian oil companies, Sanai Takaichi becoming Japan's first female prime minister, and a masked gang raiding Paris's Louvre Museum in broad daylight, making off with 88 million euros worth of jewellery. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the Week's digital team is Jamie Timson and Harriet Marsden, but sitting in for Felicity this week from our sister podcast, can I dare to venture to call it Today in History with the Retrospectors, it's Arion McNicoll. Been some tough news for Pizza Hut this week as well. They're closing branches in the UK. They've gone into administration. Pizza Hut memories, anyone? We're all of a generation where we must have had a party there.
Yes. It was one of the staples, I think, as a kid of having a birthday party. Like we ordered Pizza Hut, and then it was a very big deal when we were old enough to get Pizza Express.
What's the statute of limitations again?
The Statue of Limitations.
Statute, sorry.
I thought you were talking about a feature from the Pizza Hut buffet.
One of the biggest traumas of my childhood friendship group was a group of my friends. I wasn't there because I was away at age about 12 doing dine and dash from a Pizza Hut in Greenwich, southeast London. One of their mums found out and took them all back to the Pizza Hut to apologise and
quite right.
So yeah, absolutely. But it's a big trauma. We don't talk about Pizza Hut in our friendship group.
Well, the good news is if you are a Pizza Hut fans, that the current owner has agreed to save 64 restaurants for now. So if you do want to go on a Pizza Hut crawl, there are still plenty to choose from.
Plenty to dine and dash from.
Not endorsing that on behalf of the week. Harriet, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
I've been feeling a bit of confusion.
Imagine a power source so clean, so limitless, that it could fuel our civilization for millions of years without pollution or greenhouse gases. Sounds like science fiction, right? But this isn't a fantasy.
Nuclear Fusion Explained, a video shared by AstroNexa this week. Harriet, is this another AI slop story? What's going on?
It's kind of related, but not. So this week, the government announced this really big breakthrough for fusion energy research in the UK. So researchers at the UK Atomic Energy Authority managed to stabilize the process of fusion in a spherical fusion device rather than the typical donut-shaped device that most researchers use. And that comes after another really big breakthrough earlier this month in the US, when researchers at MIT managed to use a combination of physics and machine learning to kind of predict how the process would behave inside a fusion reactor. Because you can't really look inside a fusion plant while the fusion reaction is happening, because it's like hotter than the surface of the sun. So it's a big challenge. Two big challenges with fusion is stabilizing the process and predicting how it will go. And scientists have been trying to recreate fusion for decades, but with advances in science and technology, and now all of this money coming from big tech companies hoping to power their AI revolution and power their AI bubble, I thought it was a really good time to talk about how much the fusion race is hotting up.
Okay. I mean, I was nodding along through that. Obviously, I don't understand nuclear fusion at all. Arion, do you have any basic understanding of what the physics is, at least?
Yes. Okay, so mostly when we think of nuclear reactions, we're thinking of fission, and that is the splitting of atoms that's characterized by the famous equation E equals mc squared. But fusion is about combining atoms. So how it works is that you start with a simple gas like hydrogen, and if you make it extraordinarily hot when it's in an electrically charged state, known as plasma, the particles start moving so fast that they hit one another and fuse together. And when the hydrogen atoms fuse, they become helium, and in the process, they release a great deal of heat. And this reaction is, as Harriet was saying, what powers the sun, and we speculate could also be used to create masses of clean and abundant energy. So that's kind of the crux of why this is an exciting thing.
That was actually very well done. Okay, so I understand the appeal, Jamie, but how likely is it that the experiments Harriet has been talking about, which make a step forwards in how this technology works, will lead to sustainable energy for all of us? Because that's the prize that will have most people pricking up their ears.
Have you seen that clip of Mel Brooks on The One Show?
Yes.
Where he's just like, I cannot believe that this is a magazine show. I can't believe that you're sitting here going from this one thing to the other thing.
Yes.
And I just really had flashbacks of that with the Pizza Hut Dine and Dash straight into nuclear fusion. It's like, what is this program? What are we doing here? So in terms of implications for our lives, can fusion save the planet? Are these steps forward that important? I guess the hype must be balanced with a bit of realism. No commercial fusion power plant yet exists. We haven't yet delivered fusion energy on the grid in any kind of sustained economic way. So while the promise is massive, the kind of time frame and cost remain uncertain. But saying all that, if fusion does become commercially viable, we are looking at something that could easily reduce dependence on fossil fuels and help mitigate climate change by providing like large-scale clean power. It could catalyse economic growth. Obviously, we've talked. One of the reasons, obviously, that the UK government is pushing this forward about wanting to be a leader in all of this is because of the economic upsides. And then, really, it could change energy geopolitics. We were talking just last week on this incredible programme about the geopolitics around energy, and the countries that master fusion will obviously gain a massive strategic advantage.
Yeah, but I suppose the point is, Harriet, whether that really will be us, or whether if there's a huge threat coming for the likes of Aramco, whether Saudi Arabia, for example, puts loads of money into this technology as well. I mean, for the benefit of the planet, genuinely, but actually then that economic shift won't happen. People will be buying the parts for these new machines that can do nuclear fusion in the future from the same countries that currently supply our energy anyway. Like, we'd have to become a superpower in it.
Yeah, so I think the big picture that's really important to get here is that fusion is kind of like the holy grail of physics. Like, there is a reason that scientists and tech companies and governments around the world are betting on this, even though it's very difficult. Like, it's very difficult to recreate the process of fusion that's what powers the sun and the stars on Earth. It's very difficult, it's very expensive, but everyone is betting on it. We're talking about a potentially limitless source of clean energy that doesn't produce carbon and it doesn't produce radioactive waste. So unlike nuclear fission, there's no waste, there's no chance of a nuclear accident like Chernobyl. And just one glass of the fuel could generate enough electricity to power a home for more than 800 years.
Okay, but what about terrorism, though? You've got something that is, as you said, hotter than the sun. Does that seem like a good thing to put in countries all over the world? I mean, if you're a bad actor, you could surely still intervene.
I think that it's more important to think about the fact that every country is seriously trying to do this. So there are at least 53 fusion companies around the world at the moment. And there's 29 in the US, 4 in the UK, there's some in China, the EU. More than 30 countries in the world have got behind this big fusion experiment in France called ITER, which is the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor. It's a completely international project as between China, the EU, the UK, India, Japan, Russia, even Russia and South Korea. So every country is actually coming together on this. And at the same time, tech companies like Google and OpenAI are putting an unbelievable amount of money in the private sector. Like, this fusion race has been turbocharged by the AI boom because tech companies are needing so much more energy to power the data centers that they're building. So all of these private companies and all of these publicly funded initiatives around the world are all betting on fusion. And in a lot of ways, it's collaborative because people do believe that if we are able to harness fusion, we could save the world, basically.
Yeah, and Silicon Valley loves to do that, Arion.
Yes, that's the thing that they say they love to do, and whether or not that's the outcome remains to be seen. But I think that huge amount of money pouring into the whole business of fusion research is important. The UK government has committed over £2.5 billion over 5 years to fusion energy development. Other countries are stepping up too. Germany, for example, is signing agreements around fusion pilot plants, and the US government has committed approximately $1.48 billion for the fiscal year of last year alone. So, and then simultaneously, as you and Harriet were saying, you've got the commercial fusion sector arriving, and they're raising billions of dollars. Just in the last year alone, $2.6 billion was raised by private companies. And the scale of that investment, makes you think that there must be something close here. This must no longer be a sort of scientific fantasy, but we must be getting close if there's this pile-on of startups.
Or they're chasing, profit from this technology. That's why private companies are interested, because it's a new technology. But Jamie, if we took $10 billion and put it into the existing technology we have for clean energy and carbon capture, then we'd resolve a lot of the issues around climate change without having to develop technology that might not work.
Yes. Well, I was going to ask was, because I know, Harriet, you've been getting quite excited about this week, is that we've talked about on this show before the kind of over-reliance on kind of future technology to save us from the current climate crisis. And my worry, having read some of this about it, is that is it a distraction? We're talking in big theories here that this could completely revolutionize our lives. But does that mean that by saying fusion will save us, are we then reducing the urgency to take climate action in other areas? We only have to look at the debate over whether or not Keir Starmer would go to COP. He is now going. But to kind of show that this government hasn't, it's done some great green stuff, but it's not done everything you want. And is there a chance that we are slightly putting all our eggs in this, it's okay because in the future this nuclear fusion will happen?
I see what you're saying, and I do think that is really legitimate. But at the same time, I think a big problem in so much of what we've tried to do to reduce our reliance on carbon and fossil fuels has been short-termism. This has been in the works for decades. There was an enormous breakthrough in 2022, which was the first time in the US that scientists were able to create more energy than the process actually used up. So that was a big kind of tipping point. But this has been in the work for decades, and it takes decades to build devices in which you can stabilize the fusion process, and then it takes decades to build the power plants and to get that energy up on the grid. But at the same time, in order to achieve large-scale change, and we're talking about a global initiative here, that is a long-term investment. You can't always be thinking short-term. And obviously, we want to be focused on reliance on clean energy sources, but this is a potentially limitless source. There are limits to how much you can get from solar power, from wind, from all other sources of clean energy. This is potentially limitless. So that's the big difference. I do agree that these tech companies are not pouring billions into fusion because they genuinely care about saving the world, but they absolutely do care about needing the power that it could offer.
There's another AI element to it as well, isn't there? Which is, it's not just about getting the power to generate the data centers. It's that the AI itself, I presume, can help accelerate the maths that's required to make this work.
So the joke, they say that the joke is that nuclear fusion is the technology that's always 30 years away, but that's not actually the case anymore. Ever since that breakthrough in 2022 and the arrival of AI, we could see fusion become a significant portion of, or provide a significant portion of energy to the grid in as soon as 2050, which if you're talking about a technology that has the potential to A, completely do away with reliance on carbon, and B, also potentially power large-scale carbon capture. So theoretically, you could use this energy to power stuff to get carbon out of the atmosphere. And in theory, the hope is reverse climate change. So yeah, the arrival of AI in both of those ways has completely changed the game.
Okay, so hard to argue with the implications for all of us if you're right. But in terms of why this week I mean, what's happened this week? Something about donuts and some scientists in Oxford.
Yeah, so the devices that typically researchers use to try and recreate the conditions for fusion, most of them are these devices called tokamaks, which Soviet physicists first built in the 50s. That's a shortened version of a Russian acronym that means toroidal chamber with magnetic coils. So they basically are like tube-like machines that use magnets to spin and heat the gas until it forms plasma, and then contain and trap that plasma so it can fuse and release energy. And researchers are kind of able to stabilize the fusion process in donut-shaped tokamaks. But the big deal in the UK, and the reason why I picked it as my story for the week, is that these UK researchers are using a spherical one. So it's kind of shaped a little bit like a cored apple. And it's more compact, so there's kind of a better return per cubic meter and potentially lower costs. And these are the tokamaks that Britain is betting on for its planned fusion plant.
Okay, I'll listen back later at half speed and see if I understand then. The mad one-show mix continues from toroidal chambers. We'll be doing dancing frogs after this. Okay, Arion, it's your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week, inflatable frogs took to the streets to tell Donald Trump they were hopping mad.
Some Republicans branded today's protests a Hate America rally.
Do you see hate here? It's all about love. We love America. We hate who's in office right now.
Many chose to wear costumes to show they meant no harm. There were Uncle Sams, bears, dinosaurs, squirrels, and plenty of Donald Trumps.
Some No Kings protesters speaking to 9 News Australia on Sunday. Arion, what's the story?
Yeah, so over the weekend you had this really colourful array of inflatable costumes that appeared amid the huge crowds of demonstrators around the US and around the world, actually, who were taking part in the No Kings protests against Donald Trump. There were characters of all kinds. You had frogs and hot dogs to Santa Clauses and T-Rex dinosaurs. And the costumes have kind of come to be this rather absurd symbol of the pushback against the perceived excesses of the Trump administration. And loads of people across the US are putting them on as demonstrations of their resistance to, particularly two things, both Trump's deportation policies and also his domestic military deployments, and in some kind of the ways in which Donald Trump is starting to behave not like a traditional president, but more like a tyrant or a king, hence the No Kings rally name.
Okay, yeah, but how do you explain all of that whilst dressed as a dinosaur?
Well, that's the funny thing, that in a way, part of what they're trying to do is they're pushing back against Republican portrayals of the events as these Hate America rallies. That's how Republicans are attacking them. That's their kind of attack line to come at the protesters and make them seem insignificant. And what they're doing is they're saying, look, how can we be these Antifa super soldier thugs if we're dressed in these fluffy, silly costumes? So it's kind of it's this means to puncture the absurdity of the suggestion that they are violent thugs through an absurd display that's just completely silly to look at.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me, Jamie, a little bit of Trigger Happy TV, some of the footage that I was seeing, because there were ICE officers, if that's what we call them, detaining, if that's the right verb, some of these guys who were dressed as like, Mr. Potato Head. And there's something, it's scary because in the clips that I saw, all they were doing was expressing their freedom of speech. Who knows what else was going on, but from what I could see and what was spread on social media, they were being detained purely for that. But it was inherently amusing because you had this contrast between the way the officers are dressed, tooled up to the nines and their big helmets and everything, and these guys wearing ridiculous costumes. It's sort of inherently funny.
Yeah, this is actually really... I've seen the same videos, the one of the frog being pepper sprayed, absolutely mad. This one is really difficult for me to come down on either side for, because I think there is an argument that it does trivialise the gravity of the issues. Dressing up as a dinosaur or a banana, it kind of distracts a little bit, which I guess is what they're trying to say. But is the message being lost a little bit by the fact that they're dressed like this? And the protest that I've been on, I can't imagine turning up as an inflatable frog to that or anything, and people not turning around and being like, "Are you taking the piss?" Like, I kind of think they're not doing it yet, but there is an element to be like, if you're not understanding the nuance and the message, and like, bloody hell, people struggle with nuance in the 21st century and in the world that we live in today. If you're not understanding the nuance behind what the message and the demands, you're going to look at that and think like, these are just a bunch of jokers. Why should I take them seriously? So I do have that, the optics of it. I have that worry that's like, I understand the point, but I also am there like, are you guys kind of missing the idea?
You're nodding, Harriet.
I think all of that is really legitimate, but on the other hand, if the administration is trying to frame these protesters like super soldiers and therefore scare people from coming and joining in the protests, I do think that this is a very good way to subvert that effort. I also think the broader picture, and it's something I kind of in my head refer to as like the Trump spider web, which is the administration, the podcasters, the influencers, the social media network that they control. The Trump spider web dominates the internet. I mean, they dominate most of the information ecosphere. They are masters of the viral and they are masters of social media in a way that opposition has not been. And I think what's interesting about this is it seems to me a step in the right direction of you do need to grab people's attention. And these viral clips showing like sort of dancing inflatable dinosaurs in the face of like heavily militarized agents is so eye-catching, and they are spreading across the internet, and it is a good strategy from a PR perspective. It's getting significantly more visual grasp of the internet.
Yeah, and also, at least according to some of the protesters on the ground, it's helping to keep things civil. One of the Portland-based streamers, a guy called Brooks Brown, who co-founded a group called Operation Inflation, which collects funds so that they can get more of these free inflatable suits and hand them out, had a quote that he was talking to the New York Times, I think, and he said, when you have the inflatables, everyone starts dancing, and even the people who are very serious, they continue what they're doing. They're disciplined, but they're not very angry. And I think that in a very tense situation when, as we know, America has become so polarized, to get this kind of undercurrent of silliness to diffuse a situation that could otherwise turn very violent, and also, you have these heavily armed officers on the streets. That seems like just a simple way to make sure that at least the protests don't end in the worst possible way. It seems sensible on that level alone.
I mean, I guess, Jamie, when you compare it against the great protests of American history, people lining up for civil rights and Dr. King and all of that, the idea that in the future, in the annals of history, you'd open up whatever the equivalent of Encyclopedia Britannica would be and see a load of campaigners dressed as Mr. Potato Head seems completely undermining of important, historical events.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think the point that Arion just made is very compelling as well about, and also just about getting more people involved. The idea that if you are going to have a dance and a fun dressed up as Mr. Potato Head, it maybe is going to be more persuasive to get people out on the street on a message that they actually think and care about, than if you're saying I'm going to go and potentially get, kettled or whatever on. But I take the point that you're making, Ollie. I guess it is incredibly symbolic and symptomatic of the times that we live in. That there's a kind of now an aesthetic technological literacy that protesters have, that they understand the concept of viral moments and social media friendly visuals, that actually this is the skill of modern activism, of how you kind of gain organizing power is by creating these images. And I see Harriet's point about the way that they've taken over the internet, and maybe this is kind of fighting fire with fire. It does also mean that maybe there's more scope for more interesting, more fun. I know a lot of the time people get kind of like protest fatigue or march fatigue. Particularly, I know with the Palestine protests, I've heard about that thing of like, is there ways to make this a longer lasting, because this stuff is going to happen quite, for a long time. Is there a way to get kind of longer lasting activism by making it more aesthetically pleasing, but also more enjoyable to be a part of?
Yeah. It can be motivated by anger but not feel as angry, I guess.
Well, yeah, I think it's also, this is not the first massive anti-Trump protest. Like, millions of Americans have been protesting against Trump and his administration's actions since 2016, like for nearly 10 years. You know, I remember very clearly the Women's March against Trump and, you know, the pussy hats and stuff, and that was a very memorable moment. But people have been protesting Trump for nearly 10 years. And so when you're talking about the annals of the history books and you're talking about all the millions of people that have sustained that opposition for nearly a decade, I don't think it's fair to say that this is the only defining moment or will be the only, it doesn't seem to undermine the gravity of the situation, because this administration, their whole purpose, their whole aesthetic and their whole vibe is cruelty. It's the reveling in the cruelty, and it's the reveling in the violence and the fear and the stoking of hatred. And it seems to me to be quite an effective visual way to combat that with something that looks so absurd and pokes a hole in, because they do say that the best way to combat that sort of thing is to kind of make fun of them and make them absurd. Yes. And it is absurd to watch an adult in an inflatable frog costume stand up against a guy with a big gun.
Yeah, but a Republican wouldn't say that. I mean, a Trump-supporting Republican wouldn't say that their modus operandi is cruelty, would they, Arion? They would probably that their modus operandi is taking things seriously and being hard on the issues that matter to people, and clamping down is what you voted for. And this visually sort of suggests that you were right to do that. Like Jamie was saying, look at these jokers. We're the only ones taking this seriously.
Yes, and, you know, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt came out on X and said, if you think this is crazy, pointing to an image of naked bikers outside Portland's ICE facility, she said, congratulations, you're a Republican. And I think that sense of, like, motivating people to join MAGA by virtue of the fact that the other side is not serious, there is a potential threat there. Though I do think that if, you know, looking at an image of someone in a frog suit at a protest is the thing that tips you over into MAGA-dom, then you are probably 99% of the way there anyway. But I think even though, like, just coming back to that point about the fact that frog costumes that are inflatable and their impact on social media might be very of its moment, I think this does sort of fit into the great long history of satire in politics. And you think about, like, Count Binface and the raving monster loony party, and then through to, like, Zelensky, who started his career as a person pretending to be the president in a comedy show and then became the president of Ukraine, and Beppe Grillo's Five-Star Movement in Italy, right back through to, you know, you could take it back to the Middle Ages, where you had kind of fools and performers and jesters being the people who could speak truth to power. I think there is, and long has been, a way that you can use humour to lambast the worst excesses of the age, and I think this is possibly the latest iteration of that.
Well, I've tried. Up next, if you're a dedicated follower of fashion, we will bring you some news you already know. Jamie, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Finally, a successful delivery from Hermès.
Grace Wales Bonner was just announced as the creative director of menswear at Hermès, and I could not be more happy. Her first collection won't be till January 2027 though, so it's a really long wait, but I'm seated and I can wait, honestly. All the shows before then will be designed by the team.
Fashion journalist Roadman Fashion sharing his excitement there over a new appointment at Hermès on Tuesday. Jamie, who is Grace Wales Bonner and why has she been chosen for this role?
Yeah, it's an interesting one from this week. She's a London-born designer of English and Jamaican heritage. She trained at Central St Martin's. She's kind of one of the up-and-coming future names of fashion. She's kind of constantly put forward whenever there was a big job coming up. It was suggested she would get it. She's won loads of industry prizes. She kind of mixes interesting design with music, literature. Her work explores kind of Black identity, diasporic history, and she's collaborated kind of widely, most famously with Adidas on their kind of range of highly sought after sneakers, the Sambas. I don't know if you've noticed, Ollie, but Sambas are very cool.
Well, of course, the reason I noticed was when Rishi Sunak wore them and then everyone said they're not cool anymore.
Yes, exactly.
But that was partly her, was it, bringing those back?
Well, yeah, exactly. She did a range that were incredibly well sought after. I don't think Rishi Sunak was wearing them, despite the fact that he could probably afford to. So kind of why, I guess, is why has she been chosen? Hermès is kind of famous for continuity, craftsmanship. The person that was there before that she's succeeding, Veronique Nichonion, was nearly in charge for 40 years of Hermès' menswear. But what Wales Bonner is kind of presumably bringing is a bit of fresh impetus, cultural credibility. The big news is that she's the first black woman to head up a fashion house in creative director role, which is incredible. I guess the question is, like, we've seen people like Virgil Abloh, other, black designers come to the fore, but maybe potentially things haven't massively changed in terms of the experience of people of colour in the fashion industry. So there is always a question with this kind of stuff as to whether it's a symbolic appointment or whether there will be systemic change. And that obviously puts a huge amount of pressure on her, and that's not what I'm intending to do by bringing this. I think that she'll do an amazing job, it sounds like. But the more broader question about where the industry is perhaps the most interesting from this appointment.
Yes, although, I mean, it is true, probably, isn't it, Harriet, that we wouldn't be talking about this story if she was white, because it's not just that she's a woman. As Jamie was just saying, her predecessor at Hermès was also a woman. So it is the fact that she's black that's got this a lot of press, alongside people saying she's great and she deserves this, of course. But nonetheless, that is the thing that, people are touting as having implications for the fashion industry. What do you think those implications could be?
That is a difficult question. Obviously, there are limits to representation. It doesn't necessarily mean systemic change. But at the same time, I think that detracts from the fact that it is a historic piece of information that the first ever black woman to lead design at a major fashion house. I am not saying that that means that things will necessarily become better for people of like black backgrounds and ethnic minorities in the fashion industry, but there are limits to representation, but that is still a moment. And it is also true that her father was born in Jamaica, and her collections have typically kind of showcased inspiration from the Black and Caribbean diaspora. So, and fashion has always been able to shine light on like issues like support for the LGBTQ community and cancer awareness and the environmental concerns of the industry. Like, fashion does have the potential to showcase diversity in that way. But the question of whether or not it will actually change anything, I think, detracts from the fact that it is still a really big deal.
I suppose the thing is, though, Arion, you can have a diversity of design regardless of who you are. I mean, that's why you have so many men designing for women, and as we see here, women designing for men, right? So is it the authenticity that makes it different? It's the fact that someone says, this is my heritage and I'm bringing it into these clothes, rather than just, I've been inspired by some Chinese prints.
Well, the strange thing almost about Wales Bonner's appointment is that she's almost a continuity candidate. She's being regarded by analysts and fashion commentators as being a person who's very unlikely to disrupt the brand of Hermès' fundamental DNA. Her appointment is seen as a continuation of Hermès' tradition of investing in designers who combine creativity with craft. Her experience with menswear tailoring and her sensitivity to texture and detail and cultural reference, that makes her a very natural fit for Hermès. She's like, while Wales Bonner was highly respected for her artistic vision and her collaborations, particularly with Adidas, as Jamie was saying, that side of it does demonstrate demonstrates something about her commercial appeal, and I think Hermès will be interested in that. But I think that altogether, she's such an artistic, cultural person. Like, she's not just done fashion, she also did these exhibitions at the Serpentine Gallery and at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And so she's a thinking person, and I think that is hugely attractive to Hermès and suggests that maybe the brand is like, well, how can we keep doing what we're doing but find a younger person who's going to provide a new kind of appeal to, we hope, the next generation of Hermès customers, because we can't trade on selling to old people forever, and people with the money to buy a Birkin bag who are eventually going to die out, and we're going to have someone waiting in the wings to, like a customer waiting in the wings to take over from them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about high fashion labels, isn't it, Jamie? And we've talked about them on the show before in different contexts, but ultimately, most people listening to this who have a designer brand will have so in the form of a belt or a handbag or a fragrance. Most people can't afford the clothes that she's going to be designing. So actually, you can have as much diversity as you want behind the scenes, but actually, it's a very narrow spectrum of people who buy this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, looking at the kind of wider fashion industry, it's gone through a massive boom during the pandemic era, which was actually purely because the rich people had more money. You know, who was the people that had a lot of money to spend inside when they're in lockdown? It was the rich people who would buy this kind of stuff. Now, luxury growth has slowed and dipped, and the sector is large but kind of resilient. And brands are looking for that, like you say, that new, maybe younger creative leadership that can open up new ways of buying things. I guess also the other thing is that luxury brands aren't only selling products, they're now selling, you know, stories, like museum collaborations, limited edition objects, experiences. As Arion was saying, Wells Bonner has a history of that. So that idea of kind of cultural curation, it's a kind of multi-layered thing that they can now sell. And the kind of trickle-down cultural influence does mean that what happens at places like Hermès can reshape like mainstream aesthetics, you know, what the shoes look like, what the tailoring looks like, even kind of how things are taught in design schools. It might not seem like, yes, the people that are buying it is a small group, but actually the kind of cultural effect that these people have, these people have, and the places have, the fashion houses have, is kind of massive.
Yeah, so I might feel, Harriet, that I have no connection to what the menswear range at Hermès is, but actually when it trickles down to what my shoes from River Island look like, then I might.
You absolutely might. And I think that an interesting case study in this regard is the new global CEO of Chanel, who is a woman for the first time. So obviously Chanel is still held by the Wertheimer family. The guy who founded the company alongside Coco Chanel, the two brothers in the family are still the chairman and still the head of watches. But yeah, in 2021, they appointed this new global CEO, Lena Nair, who is now one of the most important people at Chanel. So it's the first time a woman at the helm of Chanel. And she has massively increased the funding for Chanel's charitable wing. So now it's one of the biggest philanthropic organizations in the entire world working to empower women and girls. So I do think that there is a bigger picture here, and the bigger picture is that women are starting to move into leadership positions among the biggest fashion brands. Because it's crazy that women make up 85% of the consumer base for clothes and accessories, but only 14% of leadership positions in the biggest fashion brands. But that is starting to change. There was a big change between 2021 and 2023 in terms of incoming CEOs. It's still not a great split, but more fashion brands are beginning to choose female CEOs to represent the women they're actually selling to. Like, for example, so Bernard Arnault, who is the owner of LVMH, which is Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. It's like the French multinational conglomerate that's probably like owns most of the luxury goods brands in the world. And he has chosen his only daughter to be the new CEO and chairman of Dior, which is kind of one of the really profitable brands. And they made that announcement in 2023. So now his daughter Delphine is one of the most powerful women in the world overnight.
But through nepotism.
Well,
it's a mixed picture, isn't it?
But he has 5 children and only one daughter, and he picked his daughter. So I'm saying that the picture is still not great. It's still not great in the boardrooms, but it is beginning to change.
I'm curious whether I'm not going to ask you if you have any Hermès pieces, but I am curious if you've had any fashion nightmares. Arion, in your youth, I'm imagining swaggy jeans for some reason.
I did have swaggy jeans, and I had long braids. It was an absolutely terrible look. I had them for about 3 months, and they were itchy, and I had to get rid of them. It was, in fact, there's only one photograph of it, and that photo is a photo that my wife laughs at regularly.
I'd love to see that. Please send it to me. Jamie, your fashion disasters.
So many. I was very much a indie kid, so I had jeans that were like unbelievably skinny, you know, the kind of ones where I started wearing like my girlfriend's skinny jeans, like that level of skinny that was just like horrible, because I like, you know, I'm not a kind of skinny waif type figure, so I was pulling myself into these but I was just desperate to be one of the Strokes.
Harriet?
God, I only have fashion faux pas. I was in the office yesterday in sequin leggings by accident. But I will say, like, I went through kind of a major punk phase, and I did have a pair of boots that had like spiky metal bits on them, which I think with the safety pin earrings and the skull rings was like maybe not the most chic of looks. But now it's like 99% of my wardrobe is either sequin or leopard print. So I'm waving the flag for fashion faux pas every day.
It's funny you mention it. I'm also wearing my sequin leggings today. You just can't tell because of where the webcam is.
What about you, Ollie? Ollie, tell us your fashion nightmare.
So my university was located very close to an outlet village, so I used to go there for my shopping, and that was a faux pas generally, because if it's there and on discount, there's a reason. And all of it was designer branded, and I was like, it's a bargain. It's only £30. Supposed to be 400. There's a reason. So there is a pair of plasticated leather trousers. I can't remember the brand. It might have been like Chanel or something that I wore once to a university disco. And if the pictures exist, I'd pay. In the meantime, my thanks to Jamie, to Harriet, and to Arion. You can follow this show for free. You can get every episode as soon as it's released by searching for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, where you can now watch us as well. And you can get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription if you head to theweek.com/subscriptions. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week,